Okay, and he founded the city of Detroit, and Antoine Lomé is a really remarkable guy, treated different ways in different history books, as Charlie will attest to in his books. But I've been to his hometown, like I said, like 10 times now, and Antoine was from a family that wasn't noble, but he had a good education. And his family could afford him to do a certain amount, but they couldn't go too far. And so he wanted to get ahead and use his education. He was ambitious. He joined the army in France, He joined the army and ended up learning a lot of things. He was a really bright guy. And he wanted to advance in life. And so he came over with the military, eventually came back. He crossed the ocean, I believe, 4 times, which in those days, if you could survive one crossing, you were doing well. He did it 4 times. So Antoine Lomé, when he got to, he did work over in Acadia, Maine, Nova Scotia, did things like this, spying and making maps and things like this, and he used that later on when he went back to France because he knew what this coast looked like on the East Coast. When he came back, he had realized, hey, this new world is really the Wild West, because it was the Wild West. And he shows up, and all of a sudden his name is no longer Antoine Lomé, but it's Antoine Lomé de la Motte. He tacked on a 3-word noble last name on the end of his name. There's no internet there. Who could check? So Antoine Lomé de la Motte, and he eventually dropped the Lomé and just went by Antoine de la Motte. He ended up marrying into a wealthy merchant in Montreal, and his wife, his family, when they registered the marriage, all of a sudden another name appears. Antoine de la Motte Cadillac. Cadillac is the name of a town in France, up on the near northeast of Bordeaux, down in the southwest part of France. As far as we know, he's never been there. Never been there. But who could check? Antoine Lomé de la Motte Cadillac, and he ends up making good connections. He's got a great education, and he speaks English. He comes to Canada. He ends up learning Native American languages, and he gets himself appointed to be commandant of Fort Michilimackinac, which we all know, Mackinac Island, but it was at that time, it was on the island then. It's, you know, what Fort Michilimackinac is today is on the mainland, but it was on the island for a while. They moved it back. He ends up meeting up there Native peoples, the Hurons, the Wyandots, the Odawa, who used to live down here in what we call southern Michigan, northern Ohio. And they said, you know, our grandparents got banished out of this area around the Strait. Someday we'd like to go back there. But it's been 50 years, you know, it probably won't happen. Cadillac gets wind of a big peace treaty the French are promoting in 1701 called the Great Peace of Montreal. It's going to be signed by dozens and dozens of indigenous peoples, including the feared Iroquois. And he says, as soon as that's signed, boy, we'll be able to go and set up a trading post fort at the place where the river gets narrow, Le Detroit, the Strait. So he's always a bit of a gambler, and he said, it's supposed to be signed, everybody's coming for the early part of August. Middle of June, he leaves Montreal with 200 people, 100 militaries, 100 civilians, dozens of canoes, and they come across and they come down to Detroit. And they arrive here, downtown Detroit, on the 24th of July, 1701. 2 days later, he's got a chapel built. That chapel is the beginning of this church, of this community, okay? And from 1701 until the last regular Sunday Mass is said here in 1942, there was French presence here. French became a minority language about 1840, we estimate. Why? Because the Erie Canal brought in so many immigrants like my ancestors and just overwhelmed the local French. Before the Erie Canal, it was hard to get here. You had to portage, canoes, you had to do this and this. So this community was started in 1701, and there was a series of churches downtown where the Fort Pontchartrain is. Hotel Fort Pontchartrain, you know, right across from Cobo or Huntington Place, whatever they call it now. And as that fort became bigger and became a town, of course, Catholic Church is always having candles and these things always being made of wood. There was at least 4 or 5 of them that burned over time. But finally, in 1818, so 117 years after he arrived, they built the first stone church in downtown Detroit, and it's located where the big parking garage is at just east of, like 1 block east of Woodward, 2 blocks north of Jefferson. The name's escaping right now. So, sorry, Bates and Larner. It's at the corner of Bates and Larner. It's a big parking garage now, sadly, but come the 18th, now this was the only church here in Detroit for a long time, and as Father Monsignor Chuck you might have heard him say, we were blessed in 1798 to have a certain Gabriel Richard who arrived here. He fled the French Revolution, the terror when they were chopping off people's heads and killing thousands of Catholics, religious, women, men. He would have lost his life if he hadn't fled. Gabriel Richard came to Baltimore. There was one American bishop at the time for all the United States. His name was John Carroll, University of Cleveland, Jesuit University. And he said, hey, look, I'm here. I can't go back to France. They're going to kill me. What do you want to do with me? And he said, okay, take a year, learn English, and then we're going to send you out to the places in the West, which at that days were Illinois, Missouri along the Mississippi River. And I visited, I had the luck in May, I was there at a French history conference along the Mississippi River. And there's an old church there with vertical logs, the French colonial style. And there's a sign there that said, built by Gabriel Richard and his community, 1798. And where did he get transferred after that? Right here. So Gabriel Richard is in the back chapel, literally. His remains are in the back chapel. Okay, Gabriel Richard was an incredible religious, but even more importantly, for acceptance of Catholics, he was for a civil leader. He brought in the first printing press into the territory of Michigan, printed the first newspaper, started all kinds of schools for girls and for natives. He was co-founder with the Presbyterian minister at the time and a judge, Augustus Woodward. They started the University of Michigan. So when you see University of Michigan 1817, this is the guy that built up this place, okay? He was the one that built up the stone church downtown, was loved by everybody. For 2 years, when there was no Protestant cleric in Detroit, the Protestants of Detroit respected him so much, and they were all English speaking. They said, will you do Sunday services for us after you do your Catholic Masses? This is 1816, 1817, unthinkable. We couldn't imagine that today. 100, 200 years ago, really something. The guy was loved and respected, and there is the Gabriel Richard Guild here based at this basilica, which is gathering information for one day the beatification and the canonization of Gabriel Richard. And you know, those things take generations to do usually. So he was a major, major builder of the community, the Catholic community, and of the state of Michigan. He was the first priest ever elected to Congress. Now, Detroit was only a territory then, so he didn't have a vote, but he spent 2 years in Washington, and he lobbied and got the money to get the road started between Detroit and Chicago, which became US 12, which is essentially I-94, okay? So Gabriel Richard was an incredible, incredible guy, and there's brochures of him back there. So let me just, what you're seeing here is when the 1818 church needed to be either renovated or destroyed, the land was worth a lot, the French were being outnumbered, and they decided, we're gonna sell this land downtown, we're gonna go outside of town in the West End, take this money from the land, build this church, and the rectory, the parish hall we were just in, the convent and the school, and we'll try to hang on our French as long as we can. And it worked for a couple generations, no more, didn't work after that. But when you come in here, and I used to live in Quebec, I lived 7 years in France, when you come in here, you just say, am I in the Midwest of the United States? You just don't feel like it. So you can see this is Gothic done, but it's done in the style you find all over Quebec. Not to move everybody because we're too numerous, the original people who came to Detroit with Cadillac and soon thereafter, a number of well-known original families, they have streets named after them in downtown Detroit. Things like Beaubien, Rivard, DeQuinder, Hamlin, etc., etc. They're the same names you find as donors of these stained glass windows. Okay, we can point them out later, but it's getting hard to see because it's dark outside. The upper tier of windows were actually brought from the 1818 church downtown. So although they're not beautiful, they are the oldest stained glass in the state of Michigan, dating back to the 1820s. And it's not the ones here, it's the back ones up there, the upper tiers of those, okay? The gray ones, correct, okay? And the church here was built originally, of course, 1886, with gas lighting. And it was only in about 1910 that they had to, okay, we gotta put electric lights in here, etc. So you'll notice there's a clock back over the main entrance, and it's really pretty cool, but you look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't really fit with the style. Oh, why? Because it's the style of 1910 when the church was electrified. Well, electricity was brought in. This is Father Piero Massoli. This is the group we have here. He'll be doing our bilingual mass in a little bit. Okay? Good to see you, sir. Good. We're just talking a little bit about the church here. Do what you have to do. And how much time do we have here? We'd like to get... Okay, good. We got 15 minutes. So, when you look around here, you can see that they really wanted to make a statement. So you'll see the French fleur de lis all around, in the floor, carved into the linoleum. The linoleum's from the 40s or something. But you'll see this in the back glass. You know what? Why don't we all get up? It'll probably be good. When they sold the land off and a street was built, well, that was the street that was on Paul Bien's ribbon farm. And there's DeQuinder and Hamlin over there. And but you can see this. And when I bring French people in and give them tours, they say that they're just absolutely shocked. They're absolutely shocked. I said, yes, this is the last monument of anything that was built by the French community of Detroit in 1880s before its assimilation in the early 20th century. All right? So we can look at it. You get a better view of the upper windows from the old church here on top. And if you look in the back here, the leaded glass, the clear leaded glass, I love that. I think that's beautiful. You see on the top of each dome, you see the fleur-de-lis. You'll see, and you see on the floor below your feet. They were screaming, "We are French." Now, Michelin Guide has just published, 6 months ago, the first time they ever did a Michelin Green Guide on Detroit. So Detroit is really becoming more of a tourist attraction. And I was asked to do a check on the paragraphs or two about St.Anne's. And the author had said, oh, the church is full of fleur-de-lis. It shows the American attachment to the French royal family. And I said, whoa, time out. We're Americans. We don't get into that royal family stuff. Because in France today, when you show the fleur-de-lis, in their mind, you're thinking about the Bourbon kings, the ones who lost their heads in 1789, and that you must be a royalist. And I said, no, I don't know any royalist here in the United States. For us, the fleur-de-lis means France. The New Orleans Saints took it because New Orleans, And oh, by the way, Detroit has longer French history than New Orleans does. And I was just down there recently, and I was in St. Louis, and they all make a great deal about embracing their French heritage, even though in New Orleans, almost nobody speaks French. I know, I checked, okay? I checked. Very few. I even went out to Cajun country, drove 2 hours to Lafayette. Could find barely, I found one or two, but that's about it. That's fine. Don't expect to convert people to speaking French, but to get them to embrace their history and say, this is us. And I say that I don't have a drop of French blood in me, but this is our history here in Detroit, and that people should know it and embrace it, okay?
In Louisiana, actually, there's a lot of efforts to stop school.
There was, and there was here as well.
Yeah, but in the 1950s.
Sure. And
so it's kind of lost in the last two generations.
Sure, but there was, in the 1980s, I saw that there was 1 million people in Louisiana who qualified as French speakers.
That was what they've all died from.
Well, there's 200,000 of them. Okay? So I met a few, and there's some younger people that are doing what they can, and I'm organizing musicians from Cadillac's hometown in France to come to Louisiana in October, hopefully subsidized by Codefil, the State Department of the state of Louisiana, which is for the promotion of the French language. So the guys who've been in Detroit here the last 2 years, I'm taking them to Louisiana and next time. So I don't expect to resuscitate, it's not going to happen, but it is our history here. And as Elizabeth always says, the French were here the longest, so they've been assimilated the most. You find Italian parishes and Irish ethnic groups and this, you don't find French stuff. For those of you who don't know, when French language education stopped here, and it was limited. There was only like one school here at St.Anne's come 1910, and at that time, the Bishop of Detroit said, hey, wait a minute, we got a Polish parish, we got Polish, Slovak, Croatians, Ukrainians. Guys, no, you got to switch over to English. So the nuns switched over to teaching in English. Okay? French here were switched to English as well, even though they were here first. Okay? On the other side of the river, however, they had two founding nations in one country. The British North America Act 1867 said we've got French and we got English speakers and they are co-equal. Well, demographically it hasn't worked out that way, and now it's like 80% English, 20% French. But the Franco-Ontarians, the French speakers in Ontario, managed to keep their schools, and there's about 15,000 of them now across the river. That's about 2-3% of the population, and I'm going to have dinner with them tonight with Father Piero Masolo and a few other people. And I've been active over there for a while, trying to build up threads across the river because our history is the same. Unfortunately, governments and schools look at this arbitrary invisible line in the middle of the river and say, oh well, nothing over there had anything to do with me. So when an Ontario history book has a chapter on Cadillac and a Michigan history book has a chapter on Cadillac, kind of tells us we share history, folks. And this arbitrary line shouldn't be the end of our world. So we've been trying to bring together the various Francophone and Francophile communities on both sides of the river because they can do more together. So anyway, any questions so far? Sorry, I go on about this for way too long. If you can start looking at some of these names, they're kind of hard to see. Insight into how they chose and how they did this. One other point I'd like to mention, donating families, there's two towers to this basilica. In this tower, in the east, there is one big bell called the Beaubien bell. Wonder why? It was donated to the old church in the 1840s by Madame Beaubien. Okay? When that church was torn down, they saved the bell, they put it up there. You can't see it, but it's up in the top of the tower. All right? And the 200th anniversary, 1901, the original families got together, decided to put in a 10-bell carillon. And it's up in the East Tower. And like in Notre Dame de Paris, each bell has engraved in it, I should say cast in it, a name, and then the names of the donors on the bell. And each name is like after St.Anne, and St. John, St. Joseph, and I could already tell by 1901, rather than writing it in French, they wrote it in Latin. So it's Sancta Hanna, not Sant, not the French word, not the English word, they wrote it in Latin. So already they were dealing with the diplomacy of changing the language of the parish. But these bells hadn't been working for 30 or 40 years. And we have rendezvoused to Detroit, went to bat with the French Heritage Society, and we got one of their grants to contribute to putting these bells back into service. And a year ago, May, we had a great ceremony out here in front. The French diplomat from Chicago was here, the local French diplomat, the Quebec diplomats came, and we had a ceremonial ringing of the bells back in service, and they hadn't been doing a long time. And it's really cool. So when they put the bells back in service, they don't swing them. It's too difficult to do, but they have a little clapper attached to it, and it's an electric bung on it on the outside. So Joe Moss, who's up there on top, wave Joe. Joe Moss was in charge of it. He's the music director here, really talented guy. Happens to be an engineer in the automotive industry, but don't hold it against us. When we did the ringing of the bell, I said, Joe, how are we going to ring this these days? I mean, there's no ropes anymore. Where's the switch? He pulls out his mobile phone, pulls up the app. He says, here, just press the button, John, it'll start. So we had a real nice ceremony here, and it was it was before this whole major transition of Monsignor Chuck got going. but we were already trying to do things as Rendezvous Detroit to save this jewel. What I'd like to do quickly is, before Mass starts, we have to take you into the back chapel and show you where the remains of Gabriel Richard are. And we'll talk there, and then we'll come back out and we'll have the Mass with Father Piero. Unfortunately, the design of this church means we have to go through the sacristy to get there. It's a beautiful sacristy, wood, wonderful stuff, but it's really kind of weird walking through a sacristy to get back to the chapel. Was saying it's unusual for a parish church to have a chapel, but it was done for a number of reasons, one of which is it is in the same proportions as the 1818 church. It's not as big as the 1818 church, but it's done in the same proportions. The altar piece is from the 1818 church, as are most of the center part of the communion rails in front, that I didn't point out to, sorry, in front, but you recognize wonderful carving on those communion rails. So this is right from the 1818 church. And one of the reasons they did this was that people to remember, hey look, this is where we come from, this is what we are. And one of the things when the church was built, Gabriel Richard had been deceased already for 50 some years. And they originally placed his remains underneath the altar. And there's still a little plaque out there that says, remains underneath Father Gabriel Richard. But I think like 30 years ago, they moved him out from there, and his remains are right here. And this is his bust, and there's a little light out inside, and there's flyers here. Anybody who's interested, the Father Gabriel Richard Guild. And I'd like to point out to you here, I hope you all recognize the flag of the city of Detroit. But most people don't realize is there's a fleur-de-lis down in the corner. British Lions up here at top, and the Stars and Stripes. Well, on the Detroit flag, you have the motto of the city. Some of you speak Latin, and I never studied it. Speramus meliora, on espère meilleur. You can say that's really close to French. We hope for better things. Resurgit cineribus. It will rise from the ashes. Okay? Thanks. There's some Latin studiers here. So where did this come from? In 1805, the little town of Detroit burned almost everything, 95% gone. All right? Who was in charge of St.Anne's at the time? Gabriel Richard, this guy. He mobilized the community, got major help from the other side of the river, because Windsor wasn't a town yet. There were just farms over there. He mobilized help and reorganized things, and this is one of the reasons why he was so beloved by people here in Detroit. Okay, and we point this out all the time. David, could you grab the colonial flag that's behind you? So, when people come and they want to celebrate France, oh, there you go, okay. That was the only French flag that ever flew over Detroit. The flag that you know of France today with the three colors, blue, white, and red, came about after the French Revolution. And that flag is what drove Gabriel Richard out of France with the threat of his life. And that's why when we do French things here at this church, we use that flag. And it has nothing to do with any of our, thank you, our attachment to the French royal family. it has to do with the idea and the history of France here. Okay? So, what else? Oh, I want to point out, I love this statue.
John?
Yeah.
Also, you may have seen the white flag that we usually have like about 7 or 9 floating on it. That was the national flag of France on French soil.
Yeah.
The blue flag meant overseas, or France overseas, through century France.
So as you can see from David's outfit, another board member around in Detroit, David's a serious reenactor, a conducteur. I just fake one. They made me buy one, but David's serious, and he knows his French, Canadian, and French history very well. Thank you, David. I love this statue of St.Anne, St. Joachim, and young Mary, who's pregnant. Okay? So behind the church, you'll notice on the wall, among the fleur-de-lis, you will see big A for Anne and the J for Joachim. When they sold the land downtown, in fact, most of the parishioners came here, but a certain amount set up a different parish east, and it was St. Joachim's. That survived into the 1980s, okay? And it burned, etc. It burned earlier than it was torn down. Whereas St. Anne's was the bigger group, it survived longer, okay? So any questions now before we go out for the Mass?
The connection with Assumption in Windsor?
Oh, okay. So directly across the river from us is Assumption. Assumption was built on, it's located today on Huron Church Road. The Huron people living there donated the land for that church to be built. The Hurons were one of the nations that came back from their exile in the north around Michilimackinac because Cadillac said, you come back down to the Straits, I'll help protect you from your enemies, the Iroquois, you help me out with my enemies, the British, and we'll trade fur down there and you can go back to your ancestral homelands. Detroit was started because of a fashion trend in Europe for beaver skin hats. There was no other viable commercial export out of New France except skins, especially beaver skins. So it's not an exaggeration to say Detroit was born out of a fashion trend in Europe. And you think about it, you can pack them tightly, you can fill up a ship, they'll be worth a lot. Because exporting, you couldn't export food, it didn't pack, there was no economies of scale. So after the French lost at the Plains of Abraham in 1759, and they negotiated the treaty and signed in 1763, the French king said, hey, I'm making a ton of money out of Ile Saint-Domingue. So what's Haiti and Dominican Republic today, because they're growing sugar. And sugar was the white gold. It was worth a fortune. And he said, hey, and the French Canadians still have this bitterness to this day of having been abandoned. The French king referred to New France as quelques arpents de neige, a few acres of snow. Okay? And economically speaking, in 1763, it was correct. He was making a fortune from, and so they cut a deal. Okay, you keep Canada. It's a pain for us. It's costing us money. And we want to keep these islands in the Caribbean. That brings us to where we are today. And because of 1763, the French had fought a war. The British had fought a war against the French. They built up a lot of debt. Back in London, they said, we protected those American colonists. We should tax them to pay it for it. And it's what happened after this. 1763 leads to 1776, direct line. And so you can't understand North American history without understanding what happened on both sides. What happened here in Michigan, And there's going to be a great documentary we've seen the trailer of. It's going to go on PBS here in Michigan just around the 4th of July. And it's called, David, do you remember the title of it? We saw the trailer. But it is about Michigan and its influence on American history. The American Revolution's major root was here in Detroit. Pontiac's Rebellion in 1763, where the Indian Confederation took over 8 of 11 British forts in the Midwest. It scared the heck out of them. Thank you. Manitou Films, yeah, it's called Frontier to Freedom. Thank you. It's going to be on the air, and part of it was filmed here. Okay? It scared the heck out of the people in London. They said, oh my gosh, these Indians, they took over 8 of our forts around the Great Lakes. We need a good military. Tax these people because they should pay for it. That led to the American Revolution. Also, one of the other things was the British said, we had these terrible problems. No colonists west of the Appalachians because we have more problems with the Indians. Well, most of these people in the colonists were in the East colonies had been speculating on land on the other side of the ocean, on the other side of the mountains. They were very angry about that. So the taxes stopping them from moving west, and it's really well explained if you see the PBS documentary, The American Revolution, and what we're seeing is Frontier to, whatever that was, Freedom?
Yes.
Frontier to Freedom. It's going to be a Michigan PBS thing. Part of it was filmed here. Okay? Any other questions? Yeah.
St. Pierre and Miquelon, 2 islands they kept as well off of Newfoundland.
Saint Pierre and Miquelon. The French were allowed to keep 2 islands off Newfoundland. The French naval patrol boat, the only presence of the French Navy in Saint Pierre and Miquelon, was here in Detroit in May, and it was called Operation Cadillac. And it's not a big military ship. It's 120 feet long. It's a converted fishing trawler. But it's really cool. And I spent 3 days with these guys. We were giving them tours, and they took us around the boat. And I said, why did you come here to Michigan in May and April and May in the Great Lakes? They said, well, we have to do training all the time. And it's much nicer in the Great Lakes than it is in the North Atlantic. And he said, we've got a little ship. We're far from French naval headquarters. Nobody really cares what we do too much. So we came down here. We have some great pictures. We had really a great time. We organized French naval people with Canadian naval people and American naval people. So anyway, I've talked too long as usual. Let's go back into church and we'll have our bilingual mass.